This hearing of the Agriculture, Rural Development, Food and Drug Administration Subcommittee of Appropriations will come to order. As this hearing is fully virtual, we must address a few housekeeping matters first. For today's hearing, the chair or staff designated by the chair may mute participants' microphones when they are not under recognition for the purposes of eliminating inadvertent background noise. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. If I notice that you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask you if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, staff will unmute your microphone. I remind all members and witnesses that the 5-minute clock still applies. If there's a technology issue, we will move to the next member in order until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. You'll notice a clock on your screen that will show how much time is remaining. At 1 minute remaining, the clock will turn yellow. At 30 seconds remaining, I will gently tap the gavel to remind members that their time is almost expired. When your time has expired, the clock will turn red, and I will begin to recognize the next member. In terms of speaking order, we will begin with the chairman and ranking member, then alternating between majority and minority, with members present at the time the hearing starts in the order of seniority. After that, members not present at the time of the hearing starts will be recognized in the order that they joined the meeting. Finally, House rules require me to remind you that we've set up an email address to which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing at any of our hearings or markups. That email address has been provided in advance to your staff. Last reminder, please ensure that your video is turned on at this time. Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's hearing, which is our first in the 117th Congress. And before we get underway, I'd like to welcome our returning members, including our ranking member, Jeff Fortenberry. Mr. Fortenberry and I have worked together very collaboratively and cooperatively and collegially, and I expect that that will continue during the 117th Congress. We like to welcome our new members, Representative Lauren Underwood, Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and Representative Grace Ming. On the Republican side, Representative David Valadeo is joining the subcommittee, and Representative Dan Newhouse is joining us for the first time. You each bring a unique experience to the subcommittee, and we're very happy to have you on board. Lastly, I'd like to welcome our witnesses, Ms. Fong, Ms. Kofi, Mr. Harden, and Ms. Rohn from USDA's Office of the Inspector General. Thank you so kindly for appearing before us today. As is typical with a new administration, the budget will be delayed for another month or so. Therefore, this hearing is not about the fiscal year 22 budget, but about OIG's oversight of a wide-ranging department that touches the lives of every American. I've always been a big supporter of your office and your mission to promote economy, efficiency, and integrity in USDA programs and operations. Your work through audits, investigations, and reviews help protect the taxpayers' interests while improving the department's effectiveness and efficiency. I also want to express my appreciation for Ms. Fong's service as USDA's Inspector General for over 18 years. Your tenure spans multiple administrations, including Secretary Vilsack's first term at the department. So today I'd like to hear more about your plans to conduct adequate oversight of USDA programs and the challenges you face in ensuring agreed upon recommendations are implemented and complaints are appropriately addressed. I look forward to discussing that with you as well as other important issues. And I want to say again that we appreciate you and all of the OIG staff for all that you do. Now, let me ask our distinguished ranking member, my friend and colleague, Mr. Fortenberry, if he has any opening remarks, and I'd like to recognize him at this time, if he does, which I assume that he will.
Well, you know me, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I have some opening remarks. First of all, let me thank you for your leadership, sir. I do appreciate our friendship and our ability to think critically together and collaborate, and when we have difficulties to try to find a constructive outcome. Thank you so much again for your leadership and for calling this important committee hearing. Good morning, Ms. Fong. It's nice to sort of see you again, even though we can't gather in the normal hearing room. I'd like to thank you, as the chairman did, for your work and for being with us today. We do admire the critical work that your agency is performing. Conducting audits and studies and investigations is a challenge in a normal year, but your efforts during the pandemic have presented you with even more challenges. But despite this, your testimony does indicate that you've been quite busy, and for that we are grateful. The deft, efficient delivery of USDA programs is critical to America's health, livelihood, food security, not only here, but for hundreds of millions of people around the world. Feeding programs as well for the elderly and children, safe meat and poultry products at our dinner tables, and the conservation of farmlands and forests, as well as the important support programs, stabilization programs for our farmers and ranchers. We depend upon your agency to provide us with that scorecard every year as to whether USDA is effectively implementing the various programs as designed by law. So today I'd like to hear from you about whether we are making real progress in reducing the size and scope of any incidents of monetary abuse. Second, I'd like to explore the process by which you review and audit the 29 agencies and their respective programs. I'll ask you to step back and take a look at how USDA leadership is responding to your findings, both good and bad. I also want to discuss a number of other issues, some of which were raised in your testimony. One in particular, your recent scientific research and integrity review evaluation, stating that USDA does not currently have a comprehensive inventory of its research studies and findings. This is a very important issue to the chairman and I, as we've both agreed on a new blue ribbon commission that USDA will shepherd to take a look at land-grant institutions and historical Black colleges as to how we can better collaborate on the funds that are out there. So I'll stop there for now, Mr. Chairman, and use the rest of my time during questions. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, you need to unmute, please.
Thank you. I don't believe that the chair of the full committee, Mr. Lara, is on the line. If she is, I would recognize her at this time for any comments that she would like to make. I don't believe that she is in attendance, and I would offer the same to the full committee ranking member, Ms. Granger, if she is on the line. Apparently, they are both very, very busy at the moment. We will allow them to have remarks should they come into the meeting a little later. Now, Ms. Fong, without objection, your entire written testimony will be included in the record. I'll recognize you now for your statement, and then we will proceed with questions. We ask that you summarize your statement, or you may give the entire statement. It's completely up to you. Of course, a summary would allow for more time for questions from the member. At this time, I'm delighted to welcome Ms. Fong, and I will allow you to introduce your cohorts from the IG's office. Ms. Fong, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Fortenberry. and all of the members of this subcommittee. We really appreciate the very warm welcome that you're giving us today and the chance to talk about our activities and our oversight of USDA. With me today is Ann Coffey, our Deputy Inspector General, who is also going to be the go-to witness for any investigative questions you might have. We have Gil Harden, our Assistant IG for Audit. He is a very familiar witness before this committee and is an expert on audit and inspection activities in our office. And of course, we have Jenny Roan, who is the newest member of our mission team. She is the Assistant IG for Analytics and Oversight. And in that role, she is responsible for coming up and innovating new ways for us to use data analytics and data science in our work to target the most high-risk areas for oversight. So I think you will enjoy their testimony. So I want to just start out by thanking the subcommittee for your ongoing interest in our work and your support through the funding you've given us in the appropriations process, as well as for pandemic oversight. We really appreciate the dialogue that we have with your committee. As you mentioned, this past year has been a challenging one for all. With the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic, this is our first virtual hearing as well. So there's a lot of new initiatives and techniques that we've had to master to get our work done over the past year. We've spent a lot of thought keeping our staff safe and healthy in this environment while still carrying out our mission in a maximum telework environment. And that has, I think, really been successful. I am extremely proud of all of the OIG staff who have exhibited high professionalism, dedication, and morale, and as you mentioned, have produced outstanding work over the last year. We issued 44 audit reports, obtained 345 criminal convictions, and reported over $360 million in dollar results last year alone. So kudos to everyone involved in that. The pandemic has also brought challenges to our office beyond finding new ways to accomplish our mission. As you know, USDA has received over $61 billion from pandemic response activities to address urgent needs for nutrition, farm programs, rural development, and other matters. And with those new funds for programs comes the need for oversight to ensure that those programs are serving those for whom they are intended and that fraud is addressed quickly. So one of our priorities in FY20 moving into FY21 has been to quickly analyze these new initiatives, develop our oversight approach, engage USDA managers to focus on internal controls in their programs, address the hotline complaints we are receiving in these areas, and initiate our own audits and inspections of various program activities. My written statement highlights a number of products that we have already issued, as well as the COVID procurement dashboard that our staff has developed for public use, as well as any stakeholder, which will give people an insight into the COVID procurements that USDA has executed. In addition, we have a number of ongoing reviews in such programs, such pandemic programs as the Farmers to Families Food Box Program, the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, the Food Safety and Inspection Services Pandemic Response at Slaughter and Processing Establishments, the Emergency Food Assistance Program, the SNAP Online Purchasing Program, and RD's Business and Industry Guaranteed Loan Program. As you can see, we have a full portfolio of work in this area. We have also initiated, of interest, I think, to all of us, a pulse survey of FSIS inspectors to obtain information on their perceptions about safety conditions in their work environment. We released the survey this week to the FSIS workforce, and responses are starting to come in. In all of these areas, we anticipate completing these projects in calendar year 2021, So we have a full menu of work ahead of us. Of course, in addition to pandemic response, we continue to perform oversight of our full portfolio of USDA programs and activities, as detailed in my written statement. I do want to just mention that we also do our annual mandatory work of USDA's financial statements, information technology security, and improper payments. And these areas, while we are seeing some improvement, progress is slow. We believe that additional management attention is needed to move USDA into an effective compliance position in these essential areas. We look forward to working with newly confirmed Secretary Vilsack and his team on these issues and all of the other issues facing the department. So in closing, I want to thank you and the subcommittee and ask for your continuing support as we move through the appropriation process in FY22. And we look forward to addressing your questions and engaging in dialogue with you today about the issues on your mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fong. We will now proceed with questions. As I mentioned earlier, we will begin with the chair and ranking member, then alternating majority and minority with members present at the time of the hearing start in order of seniority. Following that, I will recognize members who were not present at the time the hearing is called to order. Each member will have 5 minutes in each round, so please be mindful of your time. I now recognize myself for questions. Ms. Fong, as I mentioned in my opening statement, you've been USDA's Inspector General for almost 2 decades. Your time there spans over 5 secretaries, including Secretary Tom Vilsack from 2009 to 2017. A lot has changed since then, some due to progress and some due to new challenges. In 2009, your office identified 10 management challenges for USDA, which are vulnerabilities that can affect USDA's ability to achieve its mission. By 2017, 3 of those challenges remained on the list and 4 new ones were added. From your 2020 report, it does not look like a lot of progress has been made over the last 4 years. Why were those areas not resolved by the previous administration?
That's an excellent question. By their nature, the management challenges that we have identified facing USDA are very broad challenges. And by their nature, they require attention, concentrated attention to address and resolve. And as you probably know, some challenges that have been on our list have dropped off, and then sometimes they reappear again because situations change. I think, you know, as we were discussing earlier today, that what I would suggest is that in the areas particularly of financial management, improper payments, and IT security, that while there has been progress and every administration has moved the ball forward, there are always new challenges that crop up. And it really requires continued work and attention to get USDA into an effective posture. And that is something that we are deeply committed to working with the department on every year.
Thank you. Last year, we talked about USDA's need to improve outreach efforts to ensure that programs reach the intended participants, recipients, from low-income children receiving school meals to local farmers participating in national grant programs, as well as to socially disadvantaged farmers ranchers. This has been a top management challenge identified by your office going back to 2013. It's also a major concern of mine. Can you give us a status update on how USDA is doing to meet this challenge, how much progress the department has made, and what would it take for the issue to get off your annual management challenge report?
You have identified exactly one of those challenges that over time has been on our list, has dropped off our list, and has come back again. And this is a very sensitive area, a very challenging area for people to address. We have done audit and investigative work over the years since the 1990s, looking at various aspects of it. We continue to do work in that area. I think one thing that is essential is for tone at the top to be established, where the department takes a strong position on what its expectations are, and then to implement that tone at the top throughout the program areas in the department. As you know, we've seen different aspects of this issue in our work in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights, in our reviews of farm programs, assistance to Black, Hispanic, and women farmers and ranchers, in the Section 2501 program for outreach and assistance. There are numerous areas in the department where this clear policy direction would, I think, be the first step. And then, of course, to roll out the programs appropriately and with the right internal controls to make sure that they really are being delivered to the recipients that they are intended for.
Thank you, Ms. Fong. I think my time is just about up. So I will at this time yield to Mr. Portenberry for his first round of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, good morning, Ms. Fong. As your testimony notes, you recently completed an assessment as to whether the Trump administration's changes in policy and/or processes impacted the publication of scientific reports. There were claims that USDA was suppressing climate change research. It's important to note that your office, the OIG, did not identify any instances where the previous administration's policies or processes impacted the publication of USDA research during fiscal years 2017 through 2019. However, as I alluded to in my opening statement, you did make some interesting discoveries about scientific publications, and this is where I'd like to lead you to a question. It seems as if the research mission area cannot account for all of its research. As I'd mentioned, the chairman and I are very eager to see USDA implement this new blue ribbon panel to look at the future of land-grant institutions and how there can be better collaboration and cooperation. I think that this question of what current research is being conducted as well as findings is central to that mission. So they were not apparently able to tell how many USDA supported publications have been produced over the last couple of years. So what is your assessment of the coordination of ag research across USDA and land-grant universities?
That is an excellent question. I think when we did that review, we made that finding, and
it seemed like you stumbled into the finding. That wasn't the initial charge of the research. Is that correct?
That wasn't the initial scope, you know, and I may ask Gil to comment. But to get to the crux of your question, you are exactly right. Unless and until USDA has a way to really have accurate data on what it is producing in this area, it's difficult to measure how effective the program is, how effectively we are carrying out research, and what exactly we are looking at and how we can coordinate it. That is a very basic step that needs to be taken. So I think the crux of your question is right on.
So do you have any policy recommendations in that regard? Now, this happens every year during this hearing, that we identify the problem and then we turn to you for certain policy prescriptions, which isn't fully your job, but partly your job. Do you have recommendations?
I may defer to Mr. Hardin here, who may have some insight on that, on our recommendations.
Yes, thanks, Phyllis, and good morning, Ranking Member Fortenberry. As we stumbled into this part of the question, because that was not part of the original congressional request of questions, we found that agencies use different mechanisms in terms of recording it. So we had some information, but not all information. Some agencies were using internal systems. Others were relying on things like Google Scholar. to know what was published. So that led us to make a recommendation that the department did agree with in terms of identifying and implementing a standard mechanism by which to track these publications. They fully agreed with the recommendation and are working to implement that as we speak.
Oh, well, that's good news. Where will that be embedded? Who will have responsibility for that?
We made that recommendation to the research area, and I will go back and make sure that I know, can come back to you if it's a specific agency or not.
Yes, and a timeline for the implementation of the change.
I will get that. They included that in the response. I just don't have it in front of me.
Before the hearing is over, could you obtain that? Because this is a central question to some of our initiatives. Is that a
Yes,
possibility?
Yeah, I can look it up now.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, with that, it'd be tough to go into depth into more questions because I only have about 30 seconds. So I'll just yield back for now.
Thank you, Mr. Fortenberry. And at this time, I'd be delighted to recognize the gentlelady from Maine, Ms. Pingree.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the presenters and Ms. Baum for being here. It's always a pleasure to hear from you and the diligent hard work you do for us every year. I appreciate the question by Representative Fortenberry, the ranking member. I'm kind of going down that same pathway, so it shows these questions are extremely bipartisan. On that report, one of the concerns that I had in looking into the scientific integrity is that the OIG was only able to interview a non-statistical sample of 21 researchers at 2 of the 4 research agencies. So I understand this is a very sensitive investigation for those researchers involved, but why did you choose to use the non-statistical sample? How were the researchers selected? And I'll just throw a couple other things in. Were the names anonymous, and how did you protect them?
I think Mr. Hardin may have some detail on that. And so I'm going to defer to him.
Yeah, I know we limited it to agencies where they had, and I will can also look this up, to provide a fuller answer. But those were we chose researchers in ARS and ERS because those were the ones that had things that they were actually publishing. When you talk, and I'm sorry if I'm speaking in acronyms, we chose the Ag Research Service and the Economic Research Service because of what they published. The National Institute for Food and Agriculture and the National Ag Statistics Service really didn't have research that they published in that manner. So that's why we stuck with those 2 agencies. And it does come down to basically a judgment call of doing it non-statistically in the time that we were trying to get it done.
Got it. And I'm assuming that the question on the names of the employees being anonymous and they were protected?
Yes, if they requested to do so, most definitely.
Great. Well, in relation to the first question, or Mr. Fortenberry's question, it seems like we need a better way to evaluate this, and I think you already brought that up previously. I'll bring up a different topic. So the safety of workers in meatpacking plants is certainly something I and many others have been concerned about during the pandemic. In particular, we've seen such large outbreaks in those facilities. Reports have shown that hundreds of workers in these plants and several FSIS inspectors have sadly lost their lives due to COVID-19. Can you tell me more about the pulse survey you're planning on FSIS inspectors and their safety during the pandemic? And I guess I would also ask you, are you looking more broadly at the USDA's actions to keep FSIS personnel and other workers safe?
Let me just offer a couple comments, and then Jenny Rohn might give more detail on the survey. We have 2 projects going on with respect to FSIS processing plants during COVID. We have an inspection which is going to look at how FSIS is spending its funds under the CARES Act to ensure health and safety of the inspectors and to ensure inspections are happening appropriately and ensure COVID tests and reliable PPE and all of those issues. In addition, while we were initiating this work, we decided it would be useful to get the perspectives of the inspectors themselves. as to whether they felt protected, whether they had what they needed. So we developed a pulse survey. I'm going to turn it over to Jenny now to go into a little more detail on what it says.
Good morning. Thank you, Phyllis, and thank you for the question. The Office of Analytics and Innovation is, as of Monday, released the survey to the frontline inspectors across the Food Safety and Inspection Service. And we are calling it a pulse survey for a reason, because it is truly to check the pulse of those frontline workers in terms of their, as Phyllis said, perception of safety in their work environment, the institution of safety protocols and processes established, all related to COVID-19. So we released that survey on Monday. It's going to run for 2 weeks. And then we will be analyzing that data and working on developing a report which reflects that pulse of those frontline workers and their responses.
Great. Well, we're certainly very concerned about those issues, so we'll look forward to hearing what results you get and the information you retrieve. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Well, thank you, Ms. Pingree. At this time, I'm happy to recognize Mr. Valadeo for any questions that he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity, and our guest, thank you for being here today. My question is, well, it is important for disadvantaged Americans to have access to food. The Department's Farmers to Families Food Box program addresses this important issue. In your testimony, you mentioned that one of your ongoing projects is an inspection of the Farmers to Families Food Box program administration. Personally, I'm glad you're looking into this and how the program has been administered, because I've heard from some of my constituents that not all food items for boxes like butter have had a fair chance to be included. But I want to specifically focus on the bidding process. I've heard from some of our, because obviously I represent a large ag district and a lot of production ag, but I've also heard that on the bidding side, companies actually bid for products who had no ability to actually deliver a product. And so they won these bids by undercutting legitimate businesses, and were never able to deliver those. I mean, obviously this is a concern, because making sure that food is getting to those who need it most, making sure that there's transparency in the purchase process, and make sure that people aren't taking advantage of the system. Is there any sort of repercussions for those who played, I guess, games with the USDA, and where does that go?
Well, thank you for that question. We know, as probably all of you do, that there have been many media reports about concerns with the delivery of this program, which is why one of the reasons why we initiated our work into it. And we're in the middle of the work right now, the field work. And we are looking very carefully at the procurement process, the awarding of contracts, to make sure that the department followed the requirements of the federal acquisition regulations, to make sure that they awarded contracts appropriately. I think you've brought some interesting information to light about the dairy industry, which we appreciate. And I'm going to offer a chance to Gil here to comment in a little more depth if he wishes.
Yeah, we are looking at the solicitation process for the food box program, but also we will be getting into how they allocated funding to the different contractors, as well as did they meet the mission of what they set out to do. So those are all questions that we're looking into.
Well, the issue that we ran across in this specific situation was, it is my understanding, obviously I'm not part of those phone calls because I'm not in that business, but that one person went out and actually got prices from some of the competitors, undercut them all, was awarded the contract with no ability to actually deliver on the contract. And so the legitimate businesses, I mean, probably once the product wasn't delivered from the guy who won the contract, wasn't able to deliver, they went to the next people in line, which is legitimate. But there was a holdup in delivering food to needy families. And to me, that's a huge concern. Is there any punishment for those who go in and try to undercut everyone and without any ability to actually deliver a product? I mean, it's bad for everyone. I mean, USDA looks bad. The farmers aren't able to deliver a product, and obviously those who need it most aren't able to receive a product. So it is something I'd like to bring to your attention, and I'd like to be looked into. So
Yes, sir. The team actually can take that question up as part of what we're doing to understand. It will be part of making sure we fully understand the solicitation process and why they picked who they picked.
Okay, and then I'm going to change it up a little bit. Obviously, technology security is a big issue, and I know that you have been looking into it, and obviously there's countless cyber attacks on an ongoing basis. USDA has access to a lot of information. Farmers who sign up for programs put lots of personal information in those documents. Everything is available and accessible. Have the cybersecurity issues been addressed? Are the different USDA branches actually doing their job and making sure that farmers' personal information is secure?
That's an excellent question. This is a longstanding management challenge that we've pointed out to the department, and the department is aware of. I think we all share a commitment to protecting sensitive data. We understand the concerns, the department as well as our office. As you know, we do a review of the department's IT security posture annually. And thus far, the department's posture is less than effective. There has been slow progress, but it needs to continue to make progress here. Now, on the bright side, we do have a very good working relationship with the Office of the Chief Information Officer. So when there are situations that arise, incidents that can happen that require our oversight, either audit or investigative, there is very good communication and sharing of information as appropriate.
Okay. If there's something us as members of Congress can do, obviously we need to step in, because this is a huge issue for obviously people all across the country. So I know my time is up, so I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Valadeo. Mr. Pocan.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. And thanks to the Office of Inspector General for being with us today. Let me start with, last year we discussed the audit of the swine slaughter modernization rule. And unfortunately, we've learned a lot more about how dangerous that rule is. The Washington Post recently reported that the Trump administration actually hid data showing that the pork plants piloting the so-called self-inspection system had nearly twice as much fecal and digestive matter on meat than other plants. This contamination is obviously dangerous for consumers' health, and it's a direct result of the ever-increasing line speeds that harm meat processing plant workers. Further, the report said that beyond the 5 plants in the test program, the USDA estimates 35 additional pork plants are expected to use this system. That would represent 90% of the pork consumed in the United States. I just want to know, are you going to be doing any further audits on the food safety analysis that the agency did leading up to the approval of its rules, given this new information and this data?
That's an excellent question. As you know, we've done 2 reviews in this area already and pointed out some of the issues with the safety data. And I know that this issue has been in litigation. It's a very complex issue. We will, I think, look at this in our next planning cycle, and we're getting ready to think about that to see if there's anything that we can add here. And I'll turn it over to Gil to see if you have any additional thoughts. You may be aware of something that I'm not aware of, Gil.
No, we definitely will consider this in our next planning cycle, but I will also mention that there's the new poultry inspection system, which also deals with line speeds in poultry plants. We've done the national office oversight of that a couple of years back and have plans to do work in the field on that as soon as we can get in the field related to COVID concerns.
Yeah, I just think if you could look at both if you're going to do that, because clearly if 90% of the nation's pork are going to be under the system, I think it's in the best interest of consumers. Add to that, there also was a great report last week tonight with John Oliver. It's kind of sad that a comedy show does better news analysis than many of our cable networks, but they did a very good report. And in addition to talking about this, what I just talked about, they also brought up the COVID in the meatpacking facilities. And I know that for fiscal year 2021, your work plan notes that you're going to evaluate the food safety and inspection services response to COVID at these plants. As we know, over 57,000 workers have gotten COVID, 280 people have died. from these facilities. We also know that managers in some of these facilities bet on how many people would get this. Given this repugnant behavior by the industry, can you talk more about the scope of that investigation and when we can expect it?
Yes, that is one of our priority projects for this fiscal year. We are in the middle of field work on that right now. The inspection piece of it, which is going to look at a wide range of aspects of how FSIS is using its COVID funds to protect its workers and to make sure that everything is operating as smoothly as it can during the pandemic. And we have some very specific objectives, which we can share with you. We're also, as we've discussed, we've initiated a pulse survey of FSIS inspectors this week to find out their thoughts and their perceptions on how safety and COVID response activities are going in the plants. And I think that would also be a very useful report when it comes out. That will come out, I think, in the next few months.
Great, glad to hear that. And then in the remaining minute, if I can real quickly, on the Animal Welfare Act with respect to dog breeders, I've been alarmed by the drastic drop in the USDA citations on inspection reports and enforcement actions taken against non-compliant licensees over the last 4 years. I'm looking forward to reading a very thorough report on this. Can you please share more information about that scope and when we can get those final results?
Mr. Harden, I think, has the detail.
Yes. Yes, I will attempt to address that. We are in the process of putting that draft report together. So, sir, we're planning to release that later this spring or early summer. And doing the work, as a preview and in light of COVID, we weren't able to do all the work we had planned in terms of going to the different breeder facilities as part of the work, but we did do work at the headquarters level, and what the oversight was. We will have future work to look at things on the ground.
Great. I thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Pocan. I'd like to recognize Mr. Molnar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ms. Fong, thank you for being here with us today, and it's nice to see you again. And wanted to ask you, in your testimony, you stated that the OIG continues to receive complaints and referrals related to allegations associated with COVID-19 pandemic relief from the public. I'm wondering if you could comment on which programs you've received the most complaints.
All right. We have a hotline, as you know, that takes in complaints from the public and others. And we've received a number of complaints, some very worthy of further action. By and large, as you would expect, we're receiving complaints about the food box program, pandemic EBT, fraud, personal protective equipment. But the largest group thus far has been related to the Cfap program. And that is, we are focused on those issues right now in our investigation side.
I was going to ask you, could you identify, any of the schemes that have been used that have been defrauding people?
I'm going to ask Anne if she would like to comment on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think what we've been seeing for most of the schemes that have come in, the majority of them involve false statements or false certifications, individuals who are providing false information in order to obtain the benefits, and they would not normally be able to obtain them if they had completed them. We've also seen some level of redirecting individuals who, I don't want to say identity theft, but individuals who are applying for benefits who don't have any farming production or any interest in the agricultural sector have applied for the benefits. Those are the most common schemes that we've seen thus far with respect to the coronavirus food assistance program. And that's really what we're focusing on from the investigation side.
Okay, thank you. And then I wondered, and in your work, we've done a lot in Congress to promote rural broadband. And I think the pandemic has really illustrated how challenging this is for rural communities where kids are trying to do their homework and don't have access to the internet. Our healthcare providers want to do telemedicine, and if we don't have access, it's very difficult for that. And I appreciate Chairman Bishop's interest and focus on this as well. I wondered if you could comment on your department and just see if there are areas that you've identified that we could be doing more to advance rural broadband across the country.
That is an excellent question. Rural broadband is an area that we have looked at over the years a number of times because, as you point out, the need to be able to connect rural America with the rest of America and to provide services to people at the end of the line. We have not done work in that program recently, but I'm watching the funding streams as they come out for COVID. And I recognize that there is some additional money for that program. So I think we would want to consider your request as we design our work for the future to see if there is anything of value that we could add here.
That would be of great interest to me and our district, and I know probably other members on the panel. It is something that, as you mentioned, there are, 4 rural broadband connectivity programs within the USDA Rural Utilities Service. And it's one of those areas where we're trying to really move the ball forward. It's difficult to get, real good information on how we're doing in that. And certainly in our districts that, it's a top of mind priority. So I'd be very grateful for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Molinar. At this time, I'd like to recognize the gentle lady from Illinois, Ms. Underwood.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here and for all the important work that you do. Like so many across the country, farmers in Northern Illinois have faced some incredibly difficult years recently. They've had to cope with tough weather conditions as well as disruptions caused by the coronavirus pandemic. And through no fault of their own, they were forced to bear the brunt of the previous president's misguided trade war with China. I'm heartened to see that times appear to be looking up, but this doesn't erase the hardships that farmers have faced, and it's critical that we learn from recent experiences so we can do better, both in Congress and at USDA. I'm concerned by evidence that payments made through the Market Facilitation Program were not distributed fairly across regions and crops, and that large farms benefited at the expense of smaller farms like those in my district. Recent analyses, including a September report by the Government Accountability Office, suggest that corn, soybean, and dairy farmers in districts like mine receive disproportionately low MFP payments compared to those in other regions or producing other commodities, even though they represent some of the producers hardest hit by the trade war. Other analysis published just yesterday by the Environmental Working Group found that nearly a quarter of all MFP payments in 2019 and 2020 went to the top 1% of recipients. I'm aware that the OIG has released 2 reports on the Market Facilitation Program. However, these reports did not include analysis or recommendations as to the effectiveness of the program in carrying out its core mission to aid farmers directly impacted by retaliatory tariffs. So, Ms. Fong, I understand that your office's review of MFP is ongoing. Are you considering these concerns over the design and distribution of the MFP payments as part of this review? And if so, when can we expect to see that report? Ms. Fong, you're muted.
Okay, here we go. Let me offer a few introductory comments, and then I think Gil will have some additional detail. You are exactly right in terms of some of the issues that have come up in this whole area of the trade mitigation portfolio. we have a number of ongoing reviews, including the review of the market facilitation program. Our initial work that you referred to, we were looking at the USDA's overall authority to do these programs, and we found that overall USDA has authority to do them. And so we are now looking at the specific programs to see how they were delivered, how they're designed, whether they're accomplishing what they're supposed to accomplish. As you mentioned, GAO is doing work as well. We work very closely with GAO to make sure we're not duplicating efforts. And so they have their area of focus, as you know. We are looking at the administration of the program. We're looking at producer eligibility, accuracy of payments, and distribution of payments across demographics and geographical areas so that we don't overlap with GAO.
Great.
You may have heard about our work on the demographics issue as well, which we think is very interesting. So let me just offer Gil a chance to comment on where we are in this work and what we can expect.
Yes, ma'am. We are in the midst of field work on this assignment where we're actually looking at a sample of producer case files, having that information sent in to us. We are doing a stat sample, so there's about 100 case files that we're going to be looking at and seeing what we can say program-wide related to that on payment accuracy and eligibility. We're expecting to have that report later this summer.
Great, thank you. Your May 2020 report on MFP found that USDA's methodology is reasonable and was applied consistently, but it doesn't mean that it's effective or equitable. And so even if MFP is ended, it's important that we can apply the lessons learned to any new programs. And I want to do everything that I can to make sure that farmers in my district get a fair shake. I really encourage your office to do this necessary analysis in upcoming reviews and to make recommendations that USDA can apply to future programs. And with that, I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Underwood, for those very insightful questions. At this time, I'm happy to yield to the gentlelady from California, the co-chair of the Steering and Policy Committee and the chair of the Foreign Ops Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee, Ms. Lee of California.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much to our witnesses. Hello, this is Fong. Nice seeing you again. A couple of questions I have. First of all, I have three really. In 2019, the OIG published its 5-year strategic mission and diversity and inclusion plan that outlines specific goals and strategies and performance measures that you've established. So I wanted to find out in terms of your assessment of USDA's diversity and inclusion goals, are there challenges that you've identified, and just how are we doing in meeting the goals of that assessment, those recommendations? Secondly, let me just ask, you know, I come from California, which of course is an agricultural state, and we're always looking for new markets for our farmers. And wanted to ask you about Cuba and the status of exports to Cuba in light of the last 4 years. We know that there have been policy changes, but I'm wondering, in your assessment now, are we looking more at opening up new markets, including Cuba? And thirdly, your assessment as it relates to hemp and cannabis. Where are we on that in terms of the research and the actual results and recommendations on the use of hemp and cannabis, and the outcomes that you all are seeing in terms of your assessments, given the fact that so many states now have moved forward with medicinal and recreational use?
Let me comment on your initial question first, and then I'll ask Mr. Harden to offer some insights on the Cuba export question and the hemp and cannabis question. With respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion, this is an issue that we at OIG feel is an important issue. It's in our management challenges for the department, and we recognize that this needs concentrated attention. Thank you for mentioning our strategic plan, our strategic and diversity and inclusion plan. Within OIG, this is what guides the work of my office, because we recognize the need to have a strong approach here and a strong workforce and an inclusive workforce that values the contributions of every individual. And we think that that is critical to accomplishing our mission. I don't think we have any comments to offer because the department may not have taken the same approach to date. But as you know, we are doing a lot of work within the department about its efforts on outreach and diversity. We have a number of reviews going on right now, looking at how the department is delivering its programs for social and disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, how the department handles complaints under Title VI and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, and numerous other areas. So we anticipate this will be a continuing area of focus for us. And with that, let me just quickly turn to Mr. Harden so that we don't run out of time here.
Yes, thanks, Phyllis. With respect to your question, Congresswoman Lee, on exports to Cuba, I don't have anything specific to add, but I note your question, and it's something that I would want us to talk to the new administration about in terms of where they're going. I didn't have any reviews of that in the last administration. With regard to hemp, we did recognize that last year in our planning, that this is a new program for the department and a new area that they're going to be going into. And I actually have an assignment that will be starting a little later this year into that program. And so be happy to work with your office if there are specific questions you might have.
Well, hemp and cannabis. What about
Yes.
cannabis? Are you including that also?
My familiarity, but I'll go back and check and see if it includes cannabis as well, is more the hemp role, but I will check.
Okay, great. And finally, then I have a few more seconds, just in terms of the fact that so many more people have fallen into poverty during this pandemic, and so many more now are food insecure. I think there was one report that showed between 26 to 29 million people in the United States at some point didn't have enough to eat during the first few months of the pandemic. What are you doing in terms of empowering USDA to look at the inequities in terms of food security as it relates to poverty rates? And how can USDA be a positive force in helping to eliminate poverty?
Let me just offer some general comments. We spend a lot of time looking at the Food Nutrition Service and how it delivers its programs. And our main focus is to offer suggestions to FNS on how it can deliver those funds as effectively as possible and how it can improve its outreach. For example, in our recent report on the summer food program, one of the things we pointed out to the Food Nutrition Service was that it could serve even more eligible people, students, kids, if there was more of a focus on effective outreach to the populations for which that assistance is intended. And I think these kinds of issues can be very helpful to the agencies as we find them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. At this time, I'm delighted to recognize Ms. McCullum of Minnesota, the chair of the Defense Subcommittee of Appropriations. Ms. McCullum.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Good morning, and this is a great way to start off our hearing season. I have a question that I'm going to submit for the record, Ms. Fong. Ms. Pingree, who's also on the committee, and I both serve on Interior, and we were working on wildland fires and COVID and the type of response in that we had to do. And you had a memorandum in August of 2020 providing comments on wildland fire response plans that you were developing on. And so I'm going to submit a question. I'd like to learn a little more, and I'm sure Ms. Pingree was involved in this as well too, what we can do to be helpful or what we might need to do in that realm. Another area which I would like some more information on has to do with food distribution on Indian reservations. As we know, COVID-19 has increased food insecurity across the country. Indian country has been no exception. Native American communities across this country suffer from high rates of food insecurity. And one of the tools that's available is a food distribution program on Indian reservations. And this program's critical to the safety net, where SNAP benefits is limited, and it helps to promote tribal sovereignty. And some of the foods that are focused and relied upon help make cultural and tribal needs. Unfortunately, this program does not have a contingency plan for shutdowns, as we saw during the previous administration, and it severely impacted the ability of tribal organizations to access food. In fact, sometimes there was food available on the reservation, but it was literally locked up. So I'm going to have my office reach out to yours to see if we need to do something administratively, if we need to do something legislatively, or if there's rulemaking that can be done to prevent this in the future. With my time remaining, I was a little confused with some of your testimony on page 8 and 9, and it had to do with the Farm Service Agency counting employees, where you were collecting race, ethnicity, and gender data on producers that were part of the market facilitation program. So it appears that you're not supposed to be collecting this information on 530 producers, yet you were collecting the information, but you were doing it visually. And I'm not against collecting information like we're doing to help underserved and racial disparity communities affected by COVID, but I don't understand what you're doing with the information, and that you were collecting visual information is very alarming to me. So could you maybe tell us a little bit about what you were doing, and if you need to do it to make sure we're reaching diverse populations, about programming opportunities, work with the chair and this committee to make it happen? I know this is something Ms. Lee works on a lot. What's going on?
Yes, that is a very interesting issue, and you are exactly right that in order to really be able to measure how effective these programs are, you've got to have the right data across demographics to know if the assistance is going as it should be going and equitably. What we were seeing in FSA was that the department had a policy that when you collect this demographic data, it should be done in a way that asks the individual to self-identify as to which demographic groups an individual belongs to. It is not to be collected through the visual observation of a USD employee. In other words, if I'm a USD employee, I shouldn't be looking at a program participant and saying, this, you fit into certain categories. That's not the appropriate way to go about this. Unfortunately, we found in that program that FSA was not following department guidance, and so the data that was being collected was not data provided by the individual themselves, which therefore throws into question the validity of that data. And so what we were pointing out was that FSA really needs to bring that practice in line with departmental guidance so that we can have accurate data to measure the effectiveness of these programs. I hope that makes more sense.
Well, I'd like to get to the bottom of what's really going on. And the other thing that I found alarming, and it's on page 9, Mr. Chair, is that this information, which was inappropriately collected and not accurately collected, was possibly shared with third parties. So I want to follow up on that and understand it better. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. McCollum. At this time, I'm delighted to recognize Mr. Cuellar, the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and the ranking member. Thank you for holding this hearing today. And I also want to thank the USDA Inspector General, the folks who are present here. I want to follow up on the, Ms. Fong, the Farmers to Families Food Box Program, because we had a little issue in my area in San Antonio. As you know, in San Antonio, you had a San Antonio event and a wedding planner with no experience in food distribution that got awarded a $39.1 million contract. And as you know, the performance wasn't the best, if I can say that. My question is, how do we prevent this from happening in the future? We also have without due respect to my Californians also, but we had a California company, Gold Star Foods, that was covering all of Texas. And I'm sure it was probably done a quote on a cost, probably the most cost effective one. I assume they're going to say that, but we still had some issues in Texas. For example, in my southern part of the district, they would deliver boxes with a letter from President Trump implying that President Trump was providing this food. So I want to ask you also, is there anything in the law that prevents any president, I don't care if it's a Democrat or Republican, from giving the impression that he was providing this food to the folks there when it was the taxpayers that was doing this? So that's my question. How do we make sure that this Farmers to Families Food Box program becomes a little bit more effective? And then my second question has to do with improper payments. We still have a lot of problems with improper payments, and I'm looking at your testimony, and without going into details, I would ask you, because I know you have provided a lot of recommendations, and if y'all could provide to the committee and to my office recommendations that we can follow up to help you enforce this improper payments that are definitely more than 10% on different programs. So with that, I want to say thank you for the work that you've been doing for many years, and to your folks that are present here today.
Okay, let me comment on both of those issues, and then Mr. Harden and Ms. Coffey may have some additional comments. Farmers to Families Food Box program, yes, we are very aware of the media reports when they first started to appear about that situation in Texas. We, as you know, have ongoing work in our audits, on our audit side, to look at that whole program to see how those contracts are being awarded, to make sure that they are following the federal acquisition rules and regulations. And we anticipate having some results by the end of the year on that. To the extent that we might receive allegations of fraud in programs, as you know, our investigation staff would evaluate those allegations, and where appropriate would take action to get to the bottom of it. We don't talk about anything ongoing publicly, but that would be our normal process if we received allegations of wrongdoing. With respect to any activity by a federal employee or official that might be considered political, what we would do is look at it under the Hatch Act, which has certain very strong provisions. And where appropriate, if we received any allegation like that, we would be working with the Office of Special Counsel that has not allowed to go in her own office.
So the first one for the Afghan.
So there is. Let me just offer on improper payments that we are watching these very carefully. The department's overall improper payment rate has gone up over the last 2 years, which is a matter of concern for everyone, I think. And we certainly would like to see more progress in that area by the department. So let me just offer Gil Harden a chance to comment on any of those areas.
Thanks, Phyllis, and I'll stick with the improper payments in response to your question. Congressman, we will definitely work with your office to get information on the recommendations and different things that we've made and have implemented and what is still outstanding for those programs. Other thoughts on improper payments that we see, not only in our compliance issues, but as we do samples and looking at calculations and eligibilities, we're seeing improper payments in various programs as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman?
I think I read his lips. Was that me?
I'm sorry, this is Jeff Fortenberry. I'm just trying to get the chairman's attention for just one moment, if you'll indulge me.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Fortenberry.
Yeah, I'm sorry to break up the flow of the hearing. This is delicate because we're doing this by Zoom, but I'm getting some concerns expressed by members on my side of the aisle about order here. Perhaps you could review the order to see if we can clarify how we are proceeding, given that there's been a number of Democrats in a row. I know you're trying to balance out with who came in at the gavel, but there might be some difficulty with the Zoom.
Okay, I'm sorry. Can we verify that? I am getting instructions from staff, and we're supposed to be going by seniority.
Here you have the ranking member of the
Because I certainly would not want to do that intentionally.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, the video bar, the sound blanked out for a moment. Did you have a clarification on order?
Can I get clarification from the staff as to who should be next? Well, is Mr. Adderholt on the call? Mr. Harris? Dr. Harris?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
it's Robert Adderholt.
Okay.
I actually,
let me-
I'm on the call, but I don't have anything, so I'll pass and give my time to someone else.
All right, then Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that very much.
I apologize for the oversight. I was under the assumption that there were no other Republican members on the line, and I did not check it. I was relying on staff, so I apologize, and I assume full responsibility.
Apology accepted, and I'm juggling 2 committee hearings online at the same time, and so we're trying to make that work.
And I see Dr. Harris is also on the line, so following Mr. Newhouse, I will be delighted to recognize Dr. Harris.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Bishop, Ranking Member Fortenberry. I want to thank you for welcoming me to the subcommittee. You know, it's been my long-term goal since joining the Appropriations Committee to be a member of the Ag Subcommittee, since I'm one of the few farmers in Congress, and I'm also the former State Director of Agriculture for Washington. So I look forward to working with all of you to ensure that we can help our producers, our farmers, to feed the world. I want to thank General Fong and your team today for joining us. Thank you for your work at USDA to help ensure that federal taxpayer dollars are going to support the mission of USDA and what President Lincoln called the People's Department. And I think that label is just as true today as it was in the 1860s. While farmers and ranchers only make up about 2% of our nation's population, they have a big job to ensure that all Americans in the world receive the safest and highest quality food supply. One issue raised in your testimony this morning is the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, or the Cfap, the review and the administration by FSA. Your office is currently looking into the timeliness and accurate assistance for growers. So my questions are these. Number one, is your CFAP review part of the Bide administration's overall review of the program, or is it your review and separate from those efforts? Secondly, can you share with the committee any challenges for producers completing their application and receiving their appropriate payment? We want to make sure that the program is running efficiently and serves the intended purpose of keeping growers growing. One of the larger issues we want to look at is the integrity of our safe and secure food supply. And COVID-19 has showed many gaps that we need to address. And then thirdly, can you tell me who would your review also consider, had there not been CFAP available to our producers, would there have been a detriment to our food supply system? You know, we all saw and witnessed in the early days of the pandemic the closures, and our supply chains were severely stressed. I believe that we should ensure that our growers, just like small businesses around the country, needed and continue to need supplemental assistance to ensure growers can continue with their job of supplying the world food and fiber. So I look forward to your responses, and thank you for being here with us this morning.
Oh, I'm sorry, was I muted there?
There you are.
Okay, let me try again. Thank you. Let me offer a few comments, and then I think Mr. Harden may have some additional ones. Just to note that on our Cfap review, you asked whether this is separate from the Biden administration's review. We initiated our work during the last administration. And so it was designed, our objectives were set prior to the new administration taking office. And we are continuing to work the objectives that we set. It's helpful to know what changes may be coming, because we can then assess whether we need to change course or do anything different. But we are continuing with our original design of that project. I understand what you're saying. I don't know what the policy alternatives would have been if there were not a Cfap program. I think the trade mitigation programs that USDA has provided would be interesting to think about in that context. And we certainly are taking a look at those right now as well. So let me go ahead and offer the mic to Mr. Harden for some additional thoughts.
Thank you, Phyllis. Yes, in terms of, I just wanted to offer that we did start the review last year before the change of administration, as she said, and we've recently selected the sample of producers that we'll look at. So at this current time, I can't offer specific challenges or concerns, but that is something that we're looking at in terms of, do they have difficulties there? And with respect to the question on if it wasn't available, what would happen, and I'm oversimplifying there, it's one that I would like to go back to the team and see if there's a way we can ask that of FSA, in addition to thinking about the trade mitigation programs, in terms of what would have happened, because I feel certain there was some of that thought that went into the design of the program.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The reason that Mr. Adderholt, Mr. Newhouse, and Mr. Harris are in the latter group, I'm told by staff, is because they entered the meeting after the gavel, and everyone who was recognized earlier was present before the gavel, and we went in the order of seniority. So I apologize for any misunderstanding in that regard. And at this time, I'd like to recognize Ms. Ming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our Inspector General and your whole team for being here today and for the work that you do. I know that we've talked a little bit about the Farmers to Families Food Box Program. Glad to hear that your office is investigating. This has been a program, especially during the pandemic, that has really benefited people in my district. But its erratic implementation has also caused a lot of chaos and uncertainty. Lines at food banks and pantries are longer than I've ever seen in my life. They wrap around, 5, 6 city blocks at a time. And so not only have there been allegations of vendor fraud across the country, but unclear rule changes in each round, lack of communication, vendor changes, and then lack of accountability, which have prevented hungry people in Queens, New York, from being able to access food they so desperately need. A few of the issues I wanted to ask about. One, there seems to be different rules each round with no real communication to the nonprofits or pantries. And what's happened, what we've literally seen and heard from pantries, is they'll find out, like on a Friday afternoon, that the food that they're supposed to get and distribute on Monday will not be arriving. Second, after the first round, only accepting contracts from vendors that could provide mixed boxes, meat, dairy, produce. This meant that the kosher pantries, who also serve many of my halal observant constituents, could no longer participate in the program. And lastly, during certain rounds, vendors with extra supplies were barred from sending boxes to other boroughs or counties whose vendors came up short. So, like, a vendor was only allowed to supply in the county of Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Staten Island. Told us that they had enough for Queens and the Bronx, but that they weren't allowed to send it to us. So if you could tell me a little bit about the scope of your investigation of this program, will it only include fraud accusations, or will it provide a larger, more detailed accounting?
Okay, let me just offer a few comments, and I think Mr. Harden might have some additional detail. Thank you for all the information you've provided. I think that's very helpful to fleshing out our understanding. We are in our review of the program, we are focused on how it's being designed and delivered and how the funding is allocated to contractors and whether the contractors are actually carrying out their responsibilities under their contracts. I think that's an interesting question about the unclear rule changes and communication. Let me ask Gil if he has any thoughts on that and whether we need to follow up on that.
We will do some follow-up on it and appreciate the questions, but just one point of clarification, just for informational purposes. In looking at the Family to Food Box program, GAO, the Government Accountability Office, has a strong interest in looking at this program as well as we do. So as we've said in response to other questions, we try to not duplicate efforts. So when we started our work, it was very early in the program, so our focus is round one. As we move through the program, we know GAO is looking at other rounds so that we're not looking at the same thing, but we can talk to them about, and I've heard about the different changes between rounds. Some are characterized to make it better, others maybe not, but maybe we can ask some questions to get some clarity around that.
Just in general, so if we can, get a clear picture, whether it's you or we have to work with GAO, who received these boxes, how was the communication managed, and were they distributed equally according to population and need, or like what were the metrics used? What all of that would be really helpful. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Ming. Is Mr. Adderholt still on? Would you like to ask any questions at this time, Mr. Adderholt?
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I'm fine. I'm like I said, I'm on the call, but I will defer my time to others.
All right. If you're deferring your time, I'd like to recognize Dr. Harris.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Fong, as you know, broadband has been brought up already. I have a very specific question about that before I go on to my second question. Obviously, some companies in my district have raised concerns regarding capacity representations that have been made by some of the companies applying for funding. Their concern is that these capacity representations couldn't be met, and that'll result in an unnecessary delay of getting this broadband coverage into our rural areas, something that we know, obviously, during COVID is such a vital issue. So specifically, I have to ask you, what role would the USDA OIG, your office, have in ensuring that entities fulfill the representations they have made in applying for the funds? And of course, we have a whole lot more funds now because of COVID. Is that something that your office would be looking into? Because you implied that you are going to be taking a fresh look at the broadband initiatives and how they're being rolled out.
Yes, that's an interesting question. As you know, broadly speaking, we do audits and inspections, and we do investigations. If there is a situation where someone has a concern that there may be a false statement or fraud or something rising to that level, we have intake for those kinds of concerns, and we would evaluate it and look at it from an investigative perspective. if people are concerned about how the program itself is structured, whether there's adequate due diligence being given to the awards of the contracts, whether the program office is doing the appropriate steps before awarding contracts, we could consider doing an audit or an inspection of that aspect. And so depending on the situation, if people want to come forward with concerns, that's how we would analyze them.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, and I may bring some to your attention. And just briefly, because you've been doing this a while, the SNAP program, I usually ask you about it every year because it's a huge program, and even a small percent of fraud in a huge program is a lot of dollars. So I'd like your kind of historic perspective on where what has been happening to fraud in the program over the last few years. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? And where do you see the largest fraud occurring right now? And are there other things we can do to make the program, to decrease the amount of fraud? Because fraud on two levels is bad. It decreases the amount of monies that should be going where they are, and it also decreases public confidence in the program. So if you could give us a perspective on that.
Yes, you're right. SNAP is probably the biggest program, or one of the biggest, in USDA's portfolio, and we devote quite a bit of effort every year to investigations in that area as well as to audit oversight. To give you just an overview, last year we spent about 1/3 of our investigative resources on that area, running cases and dealing with allegations. There were some in the District of Maryland in the last few years that were fairly significant, if I recall. We don't keep a running sense of whether the fraud is going up or down, because we have much more than our workforce can handle in terms of allegations and handling those things. So we know that where there's money, there are people who take advantage of that. Let me just let Anne comment a little bit on fraud in the program, some insights.
Thank you, Phyllis. So as Phyllis said, yes, we do spend a good portion of our resources assessing where there could be potential fraud. The one thing I will say is that the use of data analytics has helped us to kind of identify specifically where we can allocate our resources. Unusually, the fraud that we've seen where it's sort of in the highest percentage is actually on the Eastern Seaboard. We have a little bit in each state, but for some reason in larger urban areas, we do tend to see higher rates of fraud in those cases. But again, we work very closely with our Office of Analytics and Innovation, as well as the USDA's Food Nutrition Service, to try to identify and really focus in on where we can make the most bang for our buck, where we can effectively put our resources in going after sort of the most significant fraud cases. We do get a number of cases that don't necessarily, we can't possibly handle all of them. So we really do try to focus on the larger ones. So it's a little bit difficult for us to be able to say exactly how the fraud rate rises or falls in a particular year, other than to say we know the amount of resources that we're expending.
Thank you. Yield back.
Very much. At this time, I'm delighted to yield to the Chair of the Military Construction Veterans Affairs Subcommittee, the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very much looking forward to serving on this subcommittee and to working with you and our colleagues. Ms. Fong, I appreciate your service and your vigilance. I do want to ask you about the Florida Citrus Program. In your office's FY21 annual plan, you stated that your office will continue to examine the Florida Citrus Block Grant Program. Can you give us a brief outline of the issues your office is looking at here?
Yes, we are near the end of that review, I believe, and I know Gil will want to offer some comments on that. We are looking to see how the program payments were made, whether they were made in accordance with guidelines and were made to eligible producers. And I think we will have results shortly, but let me ask Gil to offer some specifics.
Yes, Phyllis, that does cover the type of work that we're doing, and I because we haven't issued the report, I can't talk specifics about the findings. I'm sorry about that, but I'm happy to talk about them when we can. We are close to issuing the draft report to the agency for comment. I would expect the report to be out and final by summer at the latest.
By summer, okay, all right, and so there's no specifics you can even talk about in terms of an outline of the issues that you're looking at?
Not at this time.
Okay. I want to switch to the topic of animal welfare. Congress included a specific $500,000 increase to the USDA OIG in the FY21 appropriations package for the purpose of addressing illegal animal fighting. And I know you addressed this, and I appreciate it in your opening statement, because animal fighting is not only cruel and unethical, but it can also spread disease. Can you provide the committee with any details of what your office is doing with the increase that Congress provided? And also, can you speak to how often your office or USDA encounters other potential criminal activity in your pursuit of animal fighting cases, and how related criminal activity might interfere with the investigation?
Yes, these are significant cases in our portfolio. I'll offer some comments and then Anne might have some additional ones. We have 59 open cases involving animal fighting currently in 27 states. So it's a widespread issue and a significant issue for us. We anticipate that we will make good use of the $500,000 earmarked for those cases. To give you an idea, last year in FY20, we spent over $1 million in salaries alone for our investigators who run these cases. And they are dangerous cases because they can involve other issues such as the presence of firearms, narcotics, people who have been convicted of other felonies. There are some very significant concerns that we run into when we do these cases, so we have to make sure we approach them correctly. So let me just ask Anne if she wants to add something here.
Thank you, Phyllis. So we do, as Phyllis mentioned, have a significant number of animal fighting cases throughout the country. These tend to be labor intensive for our investigators. They have worked very hard, and during the COVID pandemic, they have continued to be out there doing these investigations because these require them to be present. You can't just do these sort of looking at records. And Phyllis is correct. We often work these cases jointly with other law enforcement, federal law enforcement agencies such as alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and explosives, or the Drug Enforcement Agency. So they are significant cases. When we go, we typically see other criminal activity that's occurring at them. And obviously that's of concern. We usually are able to work out the different aspects, the different criminal allegations, so they don't necessarily impede our investigation. But we're always mindful in working with our partner agencies when we're doing these investigations, and they do impact other criminal statutes that are in play.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I believe that we have completed a first round of questions, and I'd like to inquire if members would like to pursue a second round. It's not necessary. Mr. Fortenberry, I see your hand. Would you
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I would.
Second round?
Yeah, I would like to a second round.
Very good. Then I will allow you to go ahead with your second round of questions, and I will follow you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Let me return to the earlier question. Mr. Harden, were you able to secure the information that I asked during the intervening time?
Yes, sir, I was.
Okay. What's your answer?
So yes, in their response, and we did make the recommendation to the mission area at the department, they indicated a multi-year approach to solving this problem. In the current fiscal year 21, they're planning to coordinate among agencies and do some strategic planning in terms of what type of mechanism would work best for getting the information together. In 22, they plan on looking at how to develop that mechanism, and they do believe that they may need budgetary resources for this, so they would implement that once they got that in fiscal year 24.
Okay, Mr. Hart, it's not your problem. You're just the messenger here, but guess what? That's way too late and we need this data much faster. So I'll pursue that conversation with the chairman. But I would like to hear what your recommendations were.
That was the one recommendation for this report.
So you recommended that timeline, or that was the information that came back to you?
No. We recommended that they implement a mechanism for collecting this information so they would have the information available.
Do you perceive that as peculiar, that it would take 3 years to get this done?
You know, I can't say that I'm an expert in what they would need. And so
Well, I'm not either, but that seems like a long time.
And
besides that, we're going to need this data sooner based upon the dictates of the previous law that's being implemented now. So why don't you gently convey that message, if you would, please?
Yes, sir, I'll be glad to.
Okay. Secondly, back to Ms. Fong, it's a question about your budget. In 2019, or I'm sorry, in 20, you might want to get your pencil out. There's a couple of numbers here. In the Recovery Act of 2009, 28 billion was allocated. Your office, the OIG, received 22.5 million for oversight responsibilities of that money. As your testimony pointed out, the first 3 COVID bills this last year, we provided 61 billion. However, Congress only provided you with $750,000 as part of that for oversight. In the next COVID bill under consideration, it would bring the total of $76 billion of new spending to USDA, and you are allocated to receive $3.3 million for oversight. So the proportion of dollars has gone up significantly compared to the proportion of dollars to your agency for oversight. Is that a problem?
Well, I think you have put your finger on a question for us. We can only do as much oversight as we have resources to do. We felt that we had a good amount of funds for the Recovery Act, they were no-year funds at the time, or at least they covered a number of years.
So I didn't do the quick math with a percent. So would you say the Recovery Act allocation to you as a percent would be a fair representation of empowering your agency to do its necessary work? And how does that percent compare with the latest expenditures?
Yeah, I am not good at math on the run either.
No, I am, but I just didn't do it.
I think it's fair to say that resources have changed and ebbed and flowed, and I'm happy to hear 3.3 million is in the current bill. That's higher than we had initially thought. I think any funds that are given to us, we would put to very good use. As you know, we have a number of projects in play already.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Ms. Fong. I've only got a minute left, but obviously I raised an issue. If that's a level of concern, given the important breadth and perspective on the committee, I mean, you're being asked to do a lot. I think it's important that you communicate that back to us, please.
Yes, thank you.
If funds are insufficient. Let me ask you a question about broadband as well. Dr. Harris had touched upon this. So we've given you we've allocated over $2 billion in the last several years to this. What are the metrics for success?
On the part of the program?
Correct.
That's a very good question. We would want to go back and look at RD's metrics to see if they have any and if they make sense. We have not looked at this program, I think, in several years at a minimum.
So let me interject again. I'm running out of time, but during last year, the secretary came, and I intend to pursue this with the current secretary. Listen, the reality is we can't measure this just in terms of expenditures and wired laid. We need to measure the impacts of this assistance. And we've made a digital leap, but is it promoting telehealth and distance learning, telework, e-commerce, precision agriculture, all the things that are essential to creating an ecosystem of livability in rural communities? That's the fundamental purpose of rural development. We've got a huge, huge tool at our hands here. I want to make sure, though, that our metrics for success are aligned with the expenditures. That's my consideration.
I think that's an excellent question.
We may need to follow up with you on that, given I doubt there's a third round. That may be in the form of a letter, but I've verbally communicated, so I'd like some ongoing dialogue about that, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Fortenberry. Let me turn back to a couple of other items that I had not covered. One of them has to do with the Rural Housing Service. A report issued last year identified instances where inaccuracies were found in determining tenant eligibility and rent assistance amounts to tenants in the USDA Multifamily Rental Assistance Program. These inaccuracies resulted in underpayments as well as overpayments, keeping limited resources from reaching tenants who critically need assistance. It's well documented that only 1 in 4 eligible for assistance receive it. Effectively determining eligibility is paramount to program integrity and facilitating maximum assistance to those who need it. So you identified millions in rent miscalculations in the report. USDA said it will complete corrective actions by December 31st, 2020. Do you know if the previous administration did so before they left office?
I think Mr. Hardin might have some insight on that.
You need to unmute, Mr. Hardin.
Sorry, I thought I pushed the button correctly. Appreciate the question. We will need to check in with the Chief Financial Officer's office to see if they implemented those by the end of December.
Another question. In your testimony, you say that you're pursuing the identification of various fraud schemes associated with the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, which provides assistance to certain agricultural producers whose operations were directly impacted by the pandemic. This is troubling. Can you give us some idea of the scale of the fraud in terms of number of cases or the dollar value involved?
That's an excellent question. And I think at this stage of the game, we are pursuing these analytics approaches because we want to get an idea of the potential scale. So let me ask Jenny to comment on the work she's doing with investigations, our analytics and investigations offices on this.
Thank you, Phyllis, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are working very closely with the Office of Investigations in developing an analytics tool that utilizes tripwires, these understanding of the schemes of the known knowns on these cases in order to better investigate the entire universe and look at all of the payments and how they relate to those tripwires. So that is an ongoing process, and we are seeing good success with being able to work with investigations on establishing those analytics from a proactive perspective.
Thank you. I see I have a minute and 40 seconds. Last September, you issued an audit report on the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Services oversight of the National Veterinary Stockpile. This NVS is the animal version of the Strategic National Stockpile and is intended to allow an immediate response in the case of serious animal disease outbreaks. You found weaknesses that seem to mirror those in SNS that came to light during the current pandemic. You said, for example, that Avis hasn't conducted a complete physical inventory of the NVS supplies and equipment since January of 2017. And you made 8 recommendations, and the agency concurred with all of the findings and recommendations. And in light of the issues involving that, what are the key lessons from your review of the National Vet Stockpile that you'd recommend to agencies for the COVID vaccination efforts?
That is a really interesting question. As you know, we started that work before the pandemic the COVID pandemic struck the country. And as we issued the report, we think that there may be an opportunity here for APHIS to take a look at the recommendations we made to see if they apply to rollout of pandemic vaccines. And the reason we say that is because we understand that USDA, especially APHIS, is part of the initiative in a number of areas around the country to deliver COVID vaccines to people, which is a different role than normal. And we think that there may be some of our findings and recommendations may be applicable to this situation. APHIS might want to consider whether our recommendations on storage of vaccines, on the need for complete inventory of equipment and supplies, on the need for regular inspections of the inventory and oversight of contractors, and dealing with emergency procedures would possibly apply to the rollout of the COVID vaccine process. So I think that's a really interesting question to ask.
Thank you, Ms. Fong. Mr. Fortenberry, you, I believe, have an additional follow-up.
Mr. Chairman, I think I've given enough recommendations to the OIG for today. You seem relieved, Ms. Fong.
Enjoying the dialogue.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to have an offline conversation with you about some of the things that are raised, given our mutual interest in some of these questions, if you'd be so kind.
I'll be delighted, Mr. Fortenberry.
Thank you. I yield back. Thank you, sir, for the hearing.
Thank you. And let me thank Ms. Fong, Ms. Coffey, Mr. Harden, and Ms. Roan for your testimony and for spending the morning with us. Along with what we've discussed, we will forward additional questions to you for the record, homework. And we appreciate your diligence in getting your responses back to us in a timely manner. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for what you mean to the efficiency of the Department of Agriculture. And with that, Mr. Fortenberry, do you have any closing remarks?
No, sir, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for today's hearing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Fortenberry, and I want to thank all of the members who were in attendance, and thank you to our staff who worked hard to put this hearing together. And with that, this subcommittee hearing is adjourned.